Hi, welcome to Here to There, hosted by Carolyn Taketa, former attorney, current small groups pastor, and life coach. Through monthly conversations with pastors, authors, and guests, we hope to stir your thoughts and encourage you to move from where you are to where you want to be, in your personal life, in your leadership, or in your ministry.
When you hear the word feedback, do you automatically feel tense or nervous, maybe defensive or guarded? Or are you excited and eager and energized to learn? Well, information about our behavior is critical to our growth, and yet it is so hard to hear sometimes. On the other hand, information about someone else on your team or a coach or a small group leader is critical for their effectiveness in their roles, but yet it can be hard for us to give. So as leaders, we've probably all received feedback, we've probably given it, but how many of us really understand how to do it well? So this is an area I've worked hard to get better at, and I still have a long ways to go. So I've invited an expert to help us to learn how to do this better. Dr. Bill Donahue is one of the smartest and wisest people in small groups ministry world. Sometimes those two adjectives don't necessarily go together, but in Bill's case, it absolutely does. He is great at asking the right questions and listening critically to the responses, not just to what's being said, but understanding the underlying issues being presented, which is one of the keys to giving and receiving feedback. So Bill, thank you so much for being on Group Talk.
Great to be here, Carolyn. Great to be with you. You are one of my mentors, so I love. Well, I mean, what you guys have built together here and your team and all to really communicate with a global audience and continue to raise this value in training and leadership development and feedback and everything that you guys do. Awesome. So grateful to be part of it.
Well, thank you. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Bill. Bill has a PhD, which is why we call him Dr. Bill, but he focuses his work on building transformational leaders, groups, and teams. He's a conference speaker, author, and a strategic voice in areas of leadership development, community building, and strategic vision. His work blends both his corporate and church experience, and he serves clients in both arenas. And after working for 18 years at Willow Creek, at the church, and also at the association, Bill joined the faculty of Trinity International University, and he leads the Doctor of Ministry program there, training over 100 church leaders and pastors. Bill has published or co-authored a dozen books and training resources for all levels of leadership, including, for our purposes, the most relevant ones for us is the best-selling Leading Life-Changing Small Groups, Coaching Life-Changing Leaders, Building a Life-Changing Small Groups Ministry, and then a DVD training series, Making Small Groups Work, and most recently, a few years ago, The Irresistible Community. So I've personally used his books often, and I'm still using them. We were joking earlier off the air about how the Green Book and the Red Book are still my Bibles for small groups ministry. And those of you who have seen Bill's books, you know exactly which ones I'm talking about, because they're grounded in biblical principles, which are timeless, and they're also super practical, which I really appreciate when I'm training new coaches and leaders. So Bill's been one of my mentors in the small group ministry world for over 15 years. First, I learned from him through his books, and at conferences, I was kind of intimidated by him, but then I finally got the nerve and the guts to approach him at a smaller gathering, and he was so gracious, so helpful. So I've been privileged to have him in my life, both as a friend and as a ministry mentor. So thank you, Bill.
Good to be here. I thought you were going to say I approached him at a conference, and Bill, I need to give you some feedback. You're too kind, way too kind. But thank you. It's great to be with you. Like I said.
Yeah, and I actually heard Bill talk about feedback at a thing we were at together, and he was just casually mentioning some things about feedback, and I was like, this is really good. So I started writing them down, and I thought I'd love to talk to him and pick his brain on this topic. So let's start here. So in a nutshell, Bill, how would you define feedback, and why is this such a critical skill for leaders to have?
Yeah, thanks. And I did not prepare a definition in a succinct way for a reason, because I think so much of feedback is about posture and context and some of that kind of thing. But I would say this, it's the willingness and sometimes courage to face the realities of our leadership and to speak them to one another in ways that are developmental and redemptive. So I don't know if I could say that again, but I mean, that kind of flows through my head as I think about the sitting down with another person or a group and saying, this is the experience of reality I have with you. I want to say some things about that. I'm open to the experience of reality, so to speak, that you have with me. And let's create a dialogue around that that's productive and developmental. Yeah.
Yeah, and you said it's interesting you use the word redemptive, and you talk about that a little bit, especially for us in a ministry world.
Yeah.
Why is feedback? How can feedback be a redemptive experience?
Yeah, I think, as I reflected on the idea of doing this, and Carolyn, you mentioned that you would kind of go that direction a little bit more than I do in some other settings that I talk about by the nature of what they are, is it's such a part of discipleship, but we really wouldn't put this name on it. The fact that we give people coaching or try to help them take a next step right in their faith, or if they're running off the rails a little bit, or if they're getting confused, or like Priscilla and Aquila gave to Apollos. He's a great communicator, but off track in an area, and said, okay, we got to pull him aside and kind of do a little coaching thing here. We'll involve some feedback. And I think it's harder in church world because we have this concept that we're supposed to be so forgiving and so, oh, well, let's give them the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
And often that's destructive because that's just an excuse for having the courage to say, you know what, this needs to change. Or even worried on positive feedback, of just overdoing it or not really knowing how to give it because it sounds schmoozy or backslappy or something. And people wonder, are you being serious? So I don't know. I think we get easily intimidated by it. And there's a lot of things in church world we don't do because we just be too nice. It's just
Yes.
nice. Yeah.
Yes, I like to say that truth is kind.
Yeah.
Which means truth really should trump the kind of the nice part. But yeah, that's so true. So in that backdrop, this is why we need to receive, give and receive it well. So let's start off by giving feedback. And as we do this, we're going to do this in two parts. We're going to talk about the giving feedback part and then the receiving feedback part. So we're going to go a little bit longer today. I just want you as our audience to be aware and give you a heads up. This is such a rich topic and such a critical one. And Bill's been gracious with his time. So we're going to just go a little bit longer. And I hope the extra time will definitely be worth value to you and to your ministry. So Bill, let's start with giving feedback because that's actually a little bit easier. At least I personally find that a little easier. So what are some key things to consider when we're the ones giving the feedback?
Yeah, so a couple things come to mind, certainly. And first of all, I think we definitely need to be very specific and very focused on what it is we're saying and what we're not saying. Sometimes if we're not preparing ourselves ahead of time to say, okay, actually write it out or speak it out or do it in the mirror or whatever, particularly if it's hard feedback or challenging feedback. It can get off track a little bit, and giving this kind of feedback would be essential, for example, in a conflict resolution, right, or something like that. But it doesn't have to be in that kind of setting. But the idea of saying, okay, here's what I see, here's what it looks like, and do you hear what I'm saying? So in other words, I wouldn't say, or it's not as helpful to say, you need a little better, growth in the area of listening. Now, sometimes I'll read things because I work especially in some corporate arenas where they've been given some assessments, and I'm getting these reports of a variety of things that are done to them. And sometimes on the comments people make, they'll say, could be a better listener. Well, what's that mean? Yeah. It's kind of sort of vague. And it sounds like to the person receiving it, because, really judgmental because they right away picture themselves as listening very well in a few settings that pop into their head. They don't even want to be defensive. It just happens. And so the idea of not, being vague, but being specific would be better to say something like, when I'm talking with you, sometimes I notice you look past me and are distracted by other things in the background, for example, at a restaurant, and I'm not really sure you're paying attention. So it would help me to understand, that, but do you hear what I'm saying there? Because I've noticed that in our conversations or something like that. So that's much more specific. It's something I can picture. It's something I can say, oh, yes, I do that, or oh, I don't do that, or okay, at least versus a broader, vaguer kind of thing.
Oh, that's really good. It reminds me of marital advice, don't ever say always and never. Don't make it global. Make it really specific to it. And the examples, if you can give an example or even describe a pattern, it's much more useful. Right. And that takes thought. If you're going to give feedback, you have to, I love your point about preparing in advance. I think it rarely goes well if we just do it just off the fly in the moment.
Yeah. I mean, we certainly want to be, depending on, again, how much of this, if it's just kind of a quick thing or whatever, but certainly a prayer, certainly a sense, okay, God, help me frame this right, because what I want to do is truly edify. I want to pay attention and see if they're hearing me. Do they feel they're being judged, whatever? But there's a lot of that in there. And so I think to know, I'm just going to talk about this in this way with this example. And that'd be another thing I throw in here is really to give examples, especially if there's a pattern. If it's, hey, I've noticed that the last 3 or 4 staff meetings, you seem more withdrawn when we do kind of creative sessions. You don't jump in as you usually have. I'm checking that out with you, but I'm picking up that you're a little more distant. Can you help me with that? That's a way or a form of feedback, but it says, I see a pattern. I'm not jumping in on every little thing that happens or that I'm concerned about or may have a question about. I'm just starting to observe something, and by naming reality, which Max Dupree says first job of a leader, if I'm saying, here's a reality I see, I wanted to share that with you and see, does that make any sense? And I'm just checking that out.
Oh,
so
I love
very
that
specific
attitude.
examples are helpful. Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, I love that attitude, Bill. I just totally picture how useful that would be when the difference between naming an observation versus labeling a behavior as, you in that scenario, you can say, hey, you seem unresponsive, and you could have an edge to it. Or you can say, hey, I've observed this, that you seem to be leading back more. What's up with that? Like,
Right.
There's such a different tone with both of those.
Well, and it's hard not to have emotion in it. Now, sometimes if I've been hurt, right, and I'm giving feedback, or I'm disappointed, or I know it's going to be a very hard conversation because maybe it's been enough of a pattern that it's leading to someone having their responsibilities lessened, or maybe they're not going to get the promotion they were hoping, or whatever. And you realize as you play it out, this could lead to that. And so it gets you a little, but to say, here's what I've seen and observed, and to put that ball back in your court, and say, do you hear what I'm saying there? Do you understand what I've observed? Do you want to add to that anything? It just keeps us about not that we're not talking about people, but we can focus at least first on the behavior or pattern.
And we could totally train our small group leaders on that point to say, if you see someone being quiet or acting differently, to take them aside and ask the question, hey, something going on, Bob, because I've noticed you're more quiet, or I've noticed you seem more on edge, or whatever the observation is, and then say, hey, how can I care for you? What's going on there? Is there something you'd like to share with us? It just makes it much less defensive.
Yeah, definitely.
So other key things to think about?
Well, I think one of the things that comes to mind also is we talk about, grace and truth a lot in Christianity. Speaking truth with grace is a tension we always live in. Again, being direct, saying this is an observed behavior, naming a reality, but doing it in a way, to your point, that isn't destructive or hurtful. And to see, that's why I like to say it out loud, because I like to think, would I like to hear that? And if I have to hear that, what kind of tone of voice would it be? Would I be sitting down? I've given feedback to people depending on what it is and how I need to deliver it. I even consider posture. For example, if it's a more, I'm going to call this in the healthy sense, confrontive feedback, like we really need to talk finally, right? Maybe we've talked about this before, it's not getting through. I call that sitting across the desk, and literally sometimes it needs to be delivered that way. It needs to have more of that feel like, here's a piece of paper, it contains 5 instances where this happened, or whatever. It's a little more direct, a little more formal even maybe, and very much more, I'm looking at you, you're looking at me, versus sitting down next to someone and being on the same side of the table, and kind of, if it's again a written piece or not, but just kind of the sitting next to says, I'm with you in this. It communicates something different. I don't have to be too close or awkward or anything like that, but if you sit down and say, come here, have a seat. I want to run something by you that I've been seeing, and I think you'll want to hear it because I think it's affecting your effectiveness as a leader. And I think that's another piece I want to add, that I'm giving this, and the reason I'm having this conversation is for your development, growth. I want you to think about it. So one thing we didn't cover in the more formal thing, and I missed it, was in the preparation of that sort of delivery. How do I want to set it up?
Yes.
That's really important.
Do you set an appointment? Like the formal one, I could see on that one. And I've done that when I've had to release somebody or to remove someone from leadership. I've kept the desk between us, and I've said, hey, here's the date. I'd like you to come in. Here's what we're doing. So it sets a different tone than just, hey, drop by. I pull up a chair next to them and we're chatting. I think that context, really, those context cues help the conversation. Yeah,
it does. And also, I think, yes, sort of what's happened, what the nature of the feedback is, the personalities involved. Is this a tender person with a lot of I mean, are they already kind of on the edge a little and they're concerned and it doesn't take much to flip the switch? And I don't mean they go angry, they just cave in on you. They don't hear what you're saying because of that. Or is this someone who's a little tougher skin or whatever, and you go, okay, this one needs a little more of a direct shot. But I think that the setup is always, we need to talk. I want to go over some experience I've had with you. I'm going to give you some feedback about it. And my motive behind it, and the whole point in the conversation is, I think we can both grow together, if this is what needs to be said, in our relationship or in effectiveness in getting the work done, or helping challenge you to a higher level of leadership. So I want you to be thoughtful of that when we sit down and talk. And go, okay, so it's going to be intentional,
right?
But I'm hearing a desire to make me better. That might be one kind of conversation. The other is, no, the desire is to confront a reality that's a hard one. But I want you to know that's coming. Versus, hey, let's chat. By the way, this is really bad news. They're not ready for that emotionally. So that prep both emotionally and I think just strategically thinking down, okay, what do I want to say? How do I want to say it? How do I want to invite response? I think it's really important to think through.
Yeah, and I think giving them a little time to prepare themselves is helpful if it's going to be a hard conversation.
And so the conversation doesn't go off track.
Yes.
Right. So it's not unusual for me if I'm a little emotive. I'm talking about A, but pretty soon I'm saying, and by the way, 2 weeks ago there's B and C, and it's
so
really
heap on.
Here's 5 things I don't like about you, so keep it around what you're really talking about. Sure.
Yeah, my daughter played competitive sports for a while, and her coach was really big on the compliment sandwich. How do you feel about the compliment sandwich? Because sometimes that can come off, and by that I mean the coach would say, one positive thing, one negative thing she needed to work on, and then another positive thing, and all she heard was the negative thing, and she felt like the positive things were just to soften the blow. And she was like, I would rather you just set it straight without like trying to flatter or schmooze me either way.
Right. Exactly. It's interesting on how I even give written feedback to people when we're doing these assessments, corporate executives, whomever, church leaders. They want to know, what do I have to fix or what's wrong? And it always sounds like to me the shoe's going to drop. I really think you're a good leader. And they're like, blah, blah, blah. Just get to the point. So I tell them, I say, I have 3 very positive and encouraging strategitic things to talk to you about on how to foster leadership. And I have 2 challenges. Which would you like to talk about first? I put the ball in their court. They go, give me the bad news. Okay, here we go. Kind of thing. But it's I don't want to have it as a setup, and I certainly don't want to take the edge off what may be a reality that needs to happen. But I understand the combination of, you might say, grace and truth, and also speaking positive and negative. And that's one of the things I was thinking of, say something like, hey, I know your team has been working very hard on this. I know the effort has been there, and I know you guys have put your best foot forward. So let's not talk about that, because I know that's been done with integrity and hard work. It's the result I need to talk about with right now. We keep coming up with 5%, whatever the thing is. And we need to be 10%, not 5. And that's where the struggle comes in. We keep kind of going and doing our work. We come back, we're still at 5%. So let's really focus on how we can move that needle forward, or have a discussion about that. So it's a way of saying, I do know you worked really hard at this, but the answer's still wrong. It's not getting us where we need to go. So in light of the hard work you've done, or in light of the fact, we may need to revisit some of the players. I don't know. I haven't really thought about that part. We could talk, but I just want you to hear this has to change, and here's a time frame, and we all need to get our heads together around that. Am I making sense? That kind of conversation. So it's not a, hey, you're great. Oh, now let me tell you, you're awful. It's not necessarily that, but it's working in these things where you recognize the true value of the effort, or something that you can legitimately encourage, or say, hey, that's part of this. There's another part, though, that's not working we need to talk about. So,
Yeah, I like that. I think that breeds empathy. So then they understand that you get the good stuff, so they don't have to get defensive. I recently had a conversation, actually last weekend, with a small group leader who I need to ask to step down for a number of reasons. But they actually had done a really good job of kind of launching the group, but it was time for them to step aside. Hard conversation. I asked for lots of prayer in between. I prayed through it. I wrote it out. I knew it was going to be delicate, and I really did it because I wanted to care for them. And so I was like, okay, Lord, please help me communicate care over the removal they would hear as a rejection, potentially. Sure. But I did the compliment thing without really thinking that part through. It really was out of to thank them. I started off by thanking them for how they have served and how that was pivotal for that time. And now we're in a different time, and now they need to step back. And at the end of it, God is so good. At the end of it, they really did feel cared for, and they said, "Wow, we haven't been in a church where people care for us and want to take care of us and are releasing us so that we can grow in these other areas." So they thanked us for doing that. And I was like, oh, thank God, Holy Spirit came through. They received it in the Spirit. We offered it. But that's like what you're describing, where it's not I'm only setting you up so that I can now take you down, but really it was out of the care. And the truth and grace component was there. And those are hard conversations to have, but I think they're really trust building.
Yeah. And I would say the harder the conversation or the more significant the issue, the clearer the truth needs to be and the stronger the grace needs to be. You just really need to think about, I think, both of those. It can't just be, wow, this is a big deal, so it's going to be a whole truth dump, which I'm not saying isn't legitimate. It's, how do I offer grace in this? Because it is, like you think of your conversation, you have to let someone go. And by grace, I don't mean a matching level always of emotion or feeling, but just a sense of, when you said it, empathy. The empathy factor has to be a little higher. I know this is going to be hard for you to hear.
Yeah.
I know it is hard for you to hear. I do find, though, but putting it on myself and saying, I know, boy, it's hard for me to say it. I'm not saying don't. I just don't know if that matters as much in the moment as me recognizing, I can see this is really hard for you to hear this. And just reading. Stopping and not putting value on it. Because, I've been in that situation. No, it's just saying, I know what I just said to you was hard for you to hear. I could pick that up as best I could there. I'm just going to stop for a minute, let you sit with that and respond. That kind of thing. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And then I guess, so what about when you're going to say something hard and you're not sure if they're ready to hear it? Like, I feel like timing's such a big thing.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, with it, and then when you do that, is it helpful to ask permission? Like we say we've had a hard conversation, we've said some things, we've made some progress, but I feel like there's still some residual thing that could be said, but I'm not sure if you're going to go there. When we talk about the last 10% or whatever,
right.
The last bit. How do you know when or if you can go there with someone?
I don't think it's a magic thing, and I don't think it's...
Oh, darn it, Bill.
Yeah, no, I wish. I think you walk into it, right? It's just, you keep walking into the water as it gets deeper, and you're just testing it as you go. And I think you just keep naming the reality. Say, we've had this conversation before, and we're still there. And here's how I see there. I've described. So what I say to people giving feedback is, what is the true impact of what we're talking about? If we keep coming back to the same thing, and then 2 months later it's the same thing, I would say, here's what that starts to do in our relationship or on the job or in our marriage or whatever. And my wife and I just had a challenging conversation, having to face a pattern that, I felt like, I think I made some progress here. And she would say, yeah. But, over here, this part of it, I still feel like I'm not sure maybe if you're understanding what I need there and what would be more helpful than you doing this about doing that. And I could see where our first conversation had a number of things. We went, okay, we need to both work on something. But one I kind of had ignored. And so it was a way of sort of revisiting, but saying, that still isn't working. And it'd be very easy for me to go defensive or sullen or whatever, go inward and say, okay, I need to hear that again. But what I hadn't heard was, and here's what that does to me. So when she added, when we were on the third time around on this, it starts to make me feel like, I feel disappointed or I feel sad or I wonder, and that's a hard thing to say, but we have a relationship. So when you talk about it, what's the level of relational equity you have in there to be able to say, this just is really hard for me to hear again from you because I feel like we've been around this circle 3 times.
Right.
And I don't know what to do with that, to be honest with you, but I do know I can say this, it is hurtful to me. And then have people engage, are they repentant? Are they sorry? What can I do? Why do I keep missing it? And I think that's where we're going to talk in a minute about receiving feedback. There's a posture about all that for both in that conversation. But the courage that it takes to go, and can I just say this? It's usually the impact. And I do this in the work environment where I'm sitting down with someone saying, I'm going to tell you what people say here in this company about you when you do behavior X. And I'm going to put some of my own words to it and summarize some other things because I'm trying to protect people too. But I say, here's the gist of it. It's really around these 2 things, or it's really these 3, because I may get 8 different, but I can kind of, it's like these 2 things. Yeah, it's When you get energetic, you bowl people over. Conversations stop. Creativity leaves the room. People can't wait to get out. I say, this is what I hear. And the impact of that is boom, 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 less productivity.
Right.
And I want you to hear that because that's what's happening. So to be calm but direct. And I don't have anything then. That's everything. I don't have any other hidden shoe that's going to drop. That's what I heard. Now let's talk about what you heard.
Yeah. I love that, the focus on what is the impact we want this to have. So let's turn to the other angle. With giving feedback, we have some control. We can prepare for it as the giver. Now, the harder topic for many of us in leadership is the receiving feedback part. So what are some key things to consider when we're on the receiving end?
Yeah, and especially sometimes I know we don't have a lot of prep. It's nice when someone gives it to us and says, hey, tomorrow we're going to talk about that thing we did or the thing that's not working or whatever. And you go, okay, here we go. But I think if someone starts the conversation, however they might start it with, hey, we need to talk, or we need to sit down and go through what happened yesterday or the meeting an hour ago. You have the sense that they're saying, I'm going to give you some feedback. So I think you can have a learning posture of humility and some openness that says, I'm inviting this. And say, okay, it sounds like this is going to be, and this is okay to always name reality. Okay, so already I can sense you're going to say some things that are challenging. And what I'm trying to do right now is just be open and receptive to that. So if you see things that communicate to you that I'm not, it may be just my emotion getting in there. So
that's
free to
that's
name
so
that.
open.
So I'm giving them permission to tell me, here's how I'm experiencing. You're listening right now. It doesn't sound like, you're doing this. You're sitting back, your arms are crossed, and you're looking up at the ceiling. It doesn't really say you're listening. So but I'm acknowledging. I can tell you right now, I've got stuff stirring inside me because we're already starting a hard conversation, and I find that helpful.
That's really helpful. I have done that with my boss at times where I know he wants to give me feedback. And one time I said, I'm really churned up right now because that was a hard meeting. So give me an hour to process and kind of settle myself so that I can be in a better place to listen. And he's like, sure, go do that. And I think just to ask for what it is you're going to need, especially if you're an introvert or an internal processor, I knew in that moment I was going to say stuff I was going to regret and I was going to just lash out.
That's a great observation you make about how we process that. And again, if you know people and I'm going to dump this truck a little bit and then I'm going to have to give her or him a day, a half day, some time, or to know that other person, when I push on this, they're going to push back. They're just a natural, well, wait a minute. What do you mean by that? They're just a person that's going to engage right away. So I need to be able to say, not again to get in a fight, but to go, I know I'm going to get a quick response right away, emotionally, even with whatever. And so I need to be prepared going back to the giver a little bit. But I think the person receiving has to say, what is my bent? Am I a withdrawal? So we use it costs a bit. It's not super off the charts, but it's not a cheap assessment, the Hogan assessment. And we use it a lot in the corporate world. And it's got a report that feeds back the effect, so to speak, of your triggers. Are they more like this or like that? And there's about 13 different things that can come together, but they generally fall into the two buckets. We would say the fight or flight buckets. So you have people that move toward, whether that's emotionally or even physically with posture or whatever. And then there's people that move away, and they may even nod and go like this, like they're listening, but inside they've already left the room. They have dug in. They're sitting there going, I can't believe this person's attacking me, but they're not going to say it. They're internal processors. They're withdrawing, and they may walk out of the room, and you think, oh, they heard me, and maybe they heard half of it, but they need time. They need time to go through, all of this because it's hard for them, and the space is absolutely required. So that's a good point. If I know I'm giving feedback to different kinds of people, and it is a hard conversation, what's this person like, or what are they likely to do, and how am I prepared? So if I'm on the receiving end, I need to be self-aware more.
Yes.
Okay, I'm a person that's I'm coming at you. Versus, okay, I'm going to have to work really hard to just listen here. So that's where I think learning to make some of those statements. Hey, me, I'll probably get emotional right now as you're saying this, but I'm trying to process it all. Okay, so I'm hearing
lay it
this.
on me.
Boom, boom, boom. Yeah, or reflecting back, yeah. And so that's another thing is you want to listen for understanding, not to argue or defend. And I think a lot of times when people start saying, well, here's what I want to say, you're already going, oh, yeah, well, I got stuff I got to say, too.
True.
They lose being present. They don't pay attention. So instead of being fully focused on the giver, and this is really hard if it's challenging feedback, So here, you just said this to me. You want me to understand that this is what the impact is, and you've seen it 3 times. Is that what you just said to me? That's really hard work to listen that way.
Yeah.
And to say back to a person, I think I'm trying to hear what you said. Is that right? Is that what you said? And stay relatively calm in that. That's really hard.
That's very hard. It's pretty rare. I have to say, it's pretty rare. You used the word, Bill, triggers a little bit ago. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What do you mean by knowing your triggers?
Yeah, and this is, this comes from a great resource by Sheila Hain and Doug Stone. Thanks for the feedback. It became a very popular book. And she gives a great talk at a couple different sessions. One is at a leadership summit, I believe. She's a believer.
Yes.
And she does a good synopsis there of about 20 minutes on the topic. And there's also some book summaries. And they're about 12 pages long on this book. So if you're not got to read the whole book person. But she mentions 3 or they do, and 3 triggers, if you will. Truth triggers, relationship triggers, and identity triggers. So a truth trigger is that just the nature of what's being said itself, flips your switch. It's just purely the content.
Okay.
It's just a topic, an issue, or something where it feels like I'm poking a little bit around something that you believe strongly about. Like if I said to you, I think you distorted the truth there in the meeting yesterday and you reported your results. And I go, what, are you kidding me? I never do that. That kind of, it may flip me because I see myself as someone,
Yes.
I really care about the truth. The second one would be a relationship one. It's like the person coming down the hall toward you and you're already like, okay, here we go. They haven't even said anything yet. But given the who it is, affects how you hear feedback.
Right.
So I might hear it from you and be, oh, Carolyn shared this with me. It was really good. If it's Bob over here, it's like, Bob, what's he know? It's because it's Bob. And maybe Bob's really critical a lot. That doesn't mean Bob doesn't speak some truth or I shouldn't be hearing some. So it's easy to dismiss based on relationship. Third is identity. It just gets at the very core of who I am. It's my ministry, which I just hold so dear, or it's my what I believe my heart is around something, and you, I hear, are attacking the very thing I was made by God to do. I amp it up in that way.
Right.
So those are 3 that they say tend to make us go emotional and unable to hear effective feedback.
Those are really good. I think it took us a little time probably to unpack that, but a couple of things just come to mind. The relationship piece is so interesting because you're right. Depending on, who's giving it makes such a difference. So say in our context with the small groups ministry, you have a coach that's actually spent time building that relationship with the small group leader.
Right.
So when they come back and say, hey, leader, I noticed that you don't ask a lot of questions and you kind of pontificate. I mean, they wouldn't use that word. That word's a little loaded, but it seems like you spend a lot more time talking and less time listening to your members. Is that something maybe you could work on? If it's a coach that they trust, that they have a relationship with, I could see them responding very differently than if it's a brand new coach they don't have a relationship with, and now this person, maybe this person's younger, less experienced, is telling them that they're not a good leader, which then taps into identity issues of I'm a church leader. So I feel like of the 3, the relationship one might almost be a more visible one, a filter for people that may trigger their response.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to your point, it's a relational ministry we're in. And so the relational cues are going to be up front a little more. And I do think the truth thing, that's really a tough kind of thing because we're people of the truth, or we like to think that we are. And so if either we're being attacked around the truth or we feel like it's a personal, somebody coming at me, that's tough.
Yeah, the truth one, we've seen that pop up in small groups around politics, unfortunately. And we are in a political season where some people are really attached and feel like that there's things about that arena that is truth. Others have different views. So we've really worked hard over and over to train and to reiterate that politics really is not necessarily a truth-based thing, and to be open to different ideas, and there are groups around that. So we give feedback around that as well. So I think when you're receiving it as the recipient, is it good then to say, okay, what do you want me to do differently? Do you turn that corner?
I think so. I think you need to, what would it look like for me from your perspective, what would it look like for me to change this? And I think that's a question most people don't ask. They'll sit there, they may even acknowledge, okay, I hear what you're saying. You hear that again, I interrupt too much, or when I get energetic in a meeting, I kind of take over and I don't listen to other ideas. Thanks for letting me know that. And the person feels like, great, I've delivered the goods.
Yes.
And the person gets it. But what hasn't been communicated is, so this is what it would look like otherwise if you did. So I think I'd like to see more of. So in other words, it's a less of, more of. So I'd like to see less of you taking over when you get energetic and finding the awareness to just pause, share your idea quickly, but invite others in. I'd like to see more of that inviting others in. And I think it would look better if, you just kept aware of the amount of energy you bring verbally, once you get excited about something, because you get louder and louder and louder, as we just talked about or whatever. So what I'm looking for is a little less volume and a little more collaboration in the room. And I think if you do that, I think you'll see better engagement, feedback from people. But that would be a way that shows me your, So by me saying what would it look like to you is really important, particularly in supervisory relationships, because I start running a narrative going, oh, well, I'll do this and not that, then I'll change this and I'll do that. That may have nothing to do with what the person really wants to see from you. Right. So let them tell you. And that way you can at least say, okay, this is someone I have to do this for. And it's the boss piece or supervisory piece. But I think just knowing, and I've gotten better at asking this, and whether it's spousal relationships or others, saying, okay, so helpful would look like what? Or a step forward. I don't know if I can make a leap, because it's obviously it's a pattern, but what would a step look like? What would be helpful? And it would be like, well, you know what? A start would look like this. Boom. Oh, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that, because it's much more collaborative. So you're not like the victim just listening to the feedback being dumped on, but you're actually then taking that information, and you said earlier in terms of giving it, so you're asking for specific and action items, or what I guess now in leadership circles they're calling instead of feedback, they're saying feed forward, which is what is the forward next step, and to have the guts to ask for it. Sometimes I think we don't want to ask for it because we don't want to change, but to ask for it.
So clarity about word and clarity about what. Sorry, jumped on you there.
Yeah, no.
Give me some feedback. I interrupted you again twice. No, that's just you were saying something really important. I wanted to go, yes, good for you, but I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No worries. I do that all the time. It's something I'm working on, actually. I tend to process fast, so I tend to interrupt. So I've been working on that quite a bit. But the idea of feed forward, which is a newer term in leader world, is to really ask for the specifics. But I was saying it takes guts to do that, because sometimes I don't want to change, and I don't want to be given those action items. But I think that it's what builds the relationship. So you're in it together.
So I'm in a coaching relationship where we really have to sit down with the person, with the supervisor, and say, I'm going to help them communicate what has to be communicated, because we've already done the feedback, but now it's implications and what needs to change, and almost like, and if it doesn't, here's where we are. And it's not like you're fired next week, but at the same time, it's definitely a strong delivery. Like I got to start seeing progress over the next month or two here that looks like this. If we don't see that, then we'll be having a different kind of discussion. That's really where this one's at. And you really have to say the last 10% there. So, yeah.
Yeah,
but those are hard. Yeah.
Hard. But with ministry, I think we sometimes use the language of, we want you to be really effective and be and utilize what God has given you to do. We know you can do this. You almost like cheerleading them onto it. So try, like in that scenario with interrupting a lot or talking too much as a leader, try in the next meeting, try to just say, a little bit less, and then just kind of work on it. And I've also done this with someone giving me feedback, and in a meeting setting, I'll say, okay, we have this meeting on schedule together. You're going to be there. Well, you just observe how I'm doing, and then let me know, did I accomplish the goal I'm trying to work on, which was whatever that might be, less energy, less interrupting, whatever it is. It's nice to have that real time thing, but I would only ask them someone I really trusted, that I thought was going to deliver it with grace, because it's hard to hear. So I think we can invite that learning posture beyond, and maybe even just to clarify after the conversation. Would that be helpful to clarify afterwards? Okay, so the feedback you gave me is this. I'm going to work on this together, and just so that we're all on the same page.
Yes. I mean, again, you go back to that collaborative, the expectation setting, the feedback in the midst of maybe a new reality. So let me give you an example to kind of pull a lot of this together, especially knowing you've been heard. So the person hears you, giving, then you feed back, okay, this is what I think you say. And then we have that agreement. A step further would be, okay, so, and I have a president of a hospital that's done a really good job with this. It took him a while, but he would always drift. He would start talking about the topic, and then 5-10 minutes later, we're on something totally different. The whole executive team's sitting there going, they didn't know what to do with it because he's their boss. And,
right.
So what do we do? Is he going to come back and put the plane back on the runway again? Or is he... And so we confronted him with it in a good way. We gave assessment feedback and said, not only is it that you acknowledge this, but here's what we're challenging you to do, to say to your team, I know I do this, and I'm giving you permission to call me out when I do it, and to say you're doing it. And, you can just call a timeout, or you can do something, but we can create a secret hand thing or whatever. But, we're drifting. We had a guy I had in a small group who would just constantly do this, and we would do the airplane signal, like put the plane down.
Land the plane.
Like, off again. It's like, land the plane, you're circling. And, but it's that, so he didn't. And then to watch the first few times, they kind of like, is he telling the truth here? Are we going to still get spanked? Will it affect my career path? And so he said, when you see me drift, just say, raise your hand and go, you're drifting. And I watched them change over time. And because the impact of this was 7 people in the circle going, when are we going to get back on topic?
Right.
And because of the 20 minutes you just spent, we're not going to be able to talk about what's on the agenda that's important to me. And so now I'm starting not to like you because you keep robbing time from us by doing this drifting stuff. So it's really important to be able, I think, to set up, here's what it could look like. And it's okay for you to call me out on that. So, but just last thing I'd say about the receivers, maybe try as best you can to say, I'm grateful. I know I'm emotionally part of me, maybe not right now, and depending on how the relationship is, and if you would want to say it's hard for me to hear it, but at the same time that you took some courage to share it with me and to help me be better, that means a lot to me. I'm going to work on this. And that leaves a door open for relationship building, I think. And it doesn't hurt to do it in writing.
Yes.
Not because you're just covering, but just to be clear, say, hey, boy, we had a good 45-minute talk there. I took away about 4 or 5 things. Here's what I understand, what you're asking, what you need.
Right.
And what I heard, how's that sound? And a person can respond back, go, great. Or, well, remember, there's also this, or something like that. But it just gives you a good written reminder, because a week from now you've been busy and you want to go look back at something. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and what it communicates too is that you've given it thought, and that is adds value to the. So even if you can't say thank you in the moment because you run crying from the office or something, you can come back in an email and say thank you for that. So, any final thoughts, Bill?
I think I don't want to sound like, because I have some good interaction around this, that I'm always great at it. I feel like for everyone, it's a tough growing edge. And I think as your leadership expands, sometimes you're speaking more to people who are in positions of power or influence. And I think to get good at this is really important, but we're all learning. So I think it's okay to start any of these conversations on either side and say, I'm still trying to learn how to do this, but I need to talk about something that's kind of bumpy for us. And I have 3 things I want to say, and then I'm going to ask you to respond as best you can, and let's create a dialogue around some growth and improvement. And just, if even you can do that and realize it's going to be messy and name it, I think that'll help a lot. But it's a challenge for me too. So I want everyone to hear that, and hear that just start the conversation. So much happens when you just start the conversation.
Oh, that's a great place to stop and to end. So yes, the encouragement, start the conversation. Bill, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been so helpful. And if people want to contact you, they can connect with you through LinkedIn or social media, and also your email. And your email is?
drbilldonahue@gmail.com. So it's just DRBILL, last name, Donahue @gmail.com. drbilldonahue@gmail.
Yes, and Bill is also a great friend of the network, and he is on our Facebook group interactive page when he has time, so you can interact with him there as well. So again, thank you, Bill. God bless you and your ministry.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for listening to Group Talk. You can send us feedback by emailing grouptalk@smallgroupnetwork.com, or you can message me through our Small Group Network Facebook page as well. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Here to There. part of the Group Talk network of podcasts. If you like what you've heard, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. If you want to learn more, make sure you check out smallgroupnetwork.com for more resources.